The Nazis are the enemy. Wade into them. Spill their blood. Shoot them in the belly. When you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hey everyone, my name is John Roca. I'm a writer, producer, and host here of The Outlaw Nation and a voiceover artist as well, and a former military man. So I'm incredibly excited for us to be talking about this particular film.
Today's film is something we've been talking about for a long time, and it's a film that has such an important history in cinema, and one that has kind of an interesting... I've watched it many times over the years, and that film is Patton.
Yeah.
John, do you remember how you first came to Patton?
Yeah, I rented it, I think, when I was renting, those movies and catching up on the AFI stuff, probably back in my teenage years. I remember seeing it for the first time before I went into the military, so certainly as a teenager. And I remember being blown away by it. I was always one of these guys that gravitated to the more old school actors. Sorry, certainly George C. Scott fell into that bucket. And I was just curious about this film because of the picture of it on the cover, this massive American flag and Patton standing in front of it. So it just kind of caught my eye. And so I heard it was great. And I remember watching it. And it's been one that I've watched many, many times since for any number of reasons. So, yeah.
I watched it the first time on TV, probably when I was 12 or 13. Mm-hmm. And it was so different from anything else I had ever seen at that point.
Yeah.
I think like 12, 13, starting to go into high school, and that era is when things go from being like the simple good guy, bad guy stuff into being more complex. And Patton definitely fell into the I love him and I hate him and I don't know how to feel, and was it better that we had him or better that we didn't? And I think that introduced me to a different style of filmmaking. And I think what's so interesting, we've talked about these films that are the bridge between the old school Hollywood films and the films of the 70s.
Right. Right.
And we talked about like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner as one, and 1776, which we just did, really has that mix of it's an old school musical, and yet it has some darkness and some complexity that is unexpected. Yeah. And I think Patton's another one that, in a lot of ways, it's the old school war movie.
Yeah, it's a war movie masquerading as an anti-war movie. This is something I've discovered about the films I've watched over the last few years, is that it is very definitely an anti-war movie. And as you see the interactions, as you see the close-ups on the devastation and the costs of war that Franklin J. Schaffner does an incredible job of highlighting throughout the movie, I have put away this rah-rah feeling I had about it when I was growing up, right, and more embraced what Coppola was trying to say with his script. Which is basically that war is hell, and that it's not something to be glorified. It's not something to be, I don't know what glorified. I guess it's not something to be glorified like we saw in the old war films. Something to be lauded, or something to be aspired to, or be excited about, or bang your chest about, because the cost is limbs and lives. And even from the opening scene, which I know we'll get to when we start, but opening scene of seeing the American soldiers getting their bodies stripped. Like I had such a visceral reaction to watching that watching the film again for this episode, watching that happen. We're knee deep in what's going on in our world and our country, and the military is such an essential part of it. People keep referencing the military and seeing these young men getting their clothes ripped off of them, their weapons taken from them, their boots taken off, their jewelry taken off, and all this in some campaign to stop some evil happening in the world. So war is not pretty.
Well, and you touched on something that I definitely want your perspective on as someone who served in the military, and what your feelings are, and what you would have felt to be serving under a guy like George S. Patton. In preparation for this episode, I reread a book that I had read a few years ago, which is called Brothers, Rivals, Victors. And it is about the relationship between Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and Patton.
Yeah.
And their relationship starts well before the war. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of kind of the setup of these people, and in particular the setup of Patton, because he is a fascinating person. He was born in 1885 in California, another California boy like me. He came from a wealthy family. This was one of the richest officers in the army. His family is descended not only from Welsh lords, but has family connections to George Washington. He's a distant relation of Edward I of England, and they believe that he has multiple ancestors that signed the Magna Carta. I mean, that just shows you like where this guy comes from.
Yeah.
Comes from a military family. His grandfather was a general on the Confederate side under Jubal Early and was killed in the Civil War.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of Lieutenant Dan in that sequence in Forrest Gump where like different versions of his family died from different wars. Yeah.
He went to West Point. He had serious problems in academics, had to repeat math, struggled with reading and writing, but strangely enough, excelled at military discipline, at drill, and at athletics. Shocking. And that's where he started fencing and joined the track team and became a pentathlete in the modern pentathlon and competed in the 1912 Olympics.
Wow. I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's why this guy is so interesting. And I just want to say, because I said this is how he finished in the Olympics, is that he was 7th in swimming. Yeah. The pentathlon, by the way, is the coolest of all Olympic events, I think, because it's basically like being a pirate. It's swimming, running, shooting, fencing, and what's the other one? And equestrian, horse riding. You know, like it's like being an old school adventurer. So he was 7th in swimming, 4th in fencing. So 4th in fencing at the Olympics, 6th in equestrian, 3rd in running, and he finished with an overall, like 5th or 6th, I think, overall. And he was the highest level competitor that wasn't Swedish. Apparently, the Swedes ran the pentathlon, and there was a controversy, which is that for the pistol shooting, everybody else was using 22 caliber pistols. Yeah. He used a 38. Shockingly, George wanted a bigger gun, and they found fewer holes in the target. So the judges said, "You missed the target." And George said, "No, I shot a bullet through the hole. That's why I didn't. That's why I didn't. You don't see another hole." And if he had been right, he would have medaled.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
He fought against Pancho Villa in 1915 under General Pershing. He's a cavalryman, and that's really important to his character because the cavalry have that attitude. They have that sense of adventure and courage and old school sort of stuff that really fits his character. And he, in World War I, is when he started to discover tanks. And the cavalry transitioned from riding horses to being tanks. And he was one of these people. He was in World War I very briefly. He was wounded in battle and was taken out. He made it to the rank of colonel. And then after the war, when the army shrunk back down again, all their ranks went down. So he went back down to being a captain, I think, or a major. And he's one of these people who just pushed for what a tank could be. Originally, tanks were just there to support the infantry. And what Patton and a few other people believed, including Eisenhower, is that, no, tanks can do all this other stuff, which certainly is true in terms of World War II. Yeah. And then he got stationed with Eisenhower, and they became best friends. Patton, 6 years older than Ike, was always senior to him. They would apparently play poker against each other. Ike always won, and Patton didn't mind because he was rich. Yeah. And he was into polo and yachting and all this stuff that he brought Ike along on. And here's something he said in the 1920s. He said to Ike, when the next war comes 20 years from now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be Jackson. You be Lee. I don't want to do the heavy thinking. You just let me loose among our fucking enemies.
I love it.
Yeah.
Some people know what they're best at in life, and certainly someone like Patton, who has certainly proved, from what you just told us here with the pentathlon and what have you, he's very aware of what he can and can't do and how hard he can push himself and where he belongs, and certainly failing in academics initially let him know very clearly, these are the things I am good at. Studying and coming up with an overall battle plan, maybe not the best thing I'm best at. Politics, maybe not the best thing I'm best at. But you let me loose on a battlefield, and I will bring you a victory.
Well, and it's interesting too is that Ike and Omar Bradley, they played football. They were into team sports. Right. Patton played polo and pentathlon. He's fencing, into these individual sports.
Right.
So in 1932, there was something called do you know about the bonus army demonstrations?
I don't. Tell me about that.
So it's just so contemporary thing. Is in 1932, we're in the beginnings of the Depression, and the World War I veterans had been promised all of this pensions, all this money, and they weren't getting paid. So I think it's about 20,000 veterans marched in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And Hoover, who was still president at the time, called out the army to break up the demonstrations. This is the last time the army was used on U.S. soil against peaceful demonstrations.
For now.
And it's General Douglas MacArthur who did this. And one of his lieutenants is Colonel George S. Patton.
Wow.
And Patton was given the order. He was a cavalryman. So they mounted up on horses with fixed bayonets and tear gas, and they drove these veterans, these are World War I veterans, off of the mall in Washington, D.C. Right. Eisenhower was a junior officer on MacArthur's staff, and he continually said, don't do this.
Yep.
And you know what the veterans chanted at Patton as they drove him away?
What?
Shame, shame. It's just kind of amazing to me that happened,
Yeah, when you're young, you can convince yourself of so many things, and especially when you're in the military, because the military drills it into you to believe a certain thing. You don't question orders, you follow orders. And for some people, they do that, and it works for them. There's a construct of a society I can function in. I know that I don't have to question orders. I can just do this. And it's not my responsibility because I didn't give the order. I'm just following orders. And then there are other people like Eisenhower who question the orders. And this is why he is when World War II happens, he's in charge of everything, because he understands the bigger picture, right? Yep. We see this in Henry V when Henry is hiding out amongst his troops and has the conversation with them. And there are some troops that say, well, whatever I do in battle tomorrow, my sin is washed away because the king commanded the battle. I don't have any responsibility. And the king in disguise says, well, that's not 100% true, because what you do on the battlefield is your responsibility. So if you do dirty stuff on the battlefield, or you cheat, or you're evil on the battlefield, that's your thing to carry. The king does not wipe away your sins just because he commanded you to be on the battlefield. So there's that kind of argument about, well, what should you think? And the army, of course, or the military tries to get away by saying, well, if you feel an order is against your morality, it is your responsibility to question it. Yet when you question it to your superiors, they don't go, oh, you know what? That's a good point. Let's take a look at it. They get really offended by it because they think you're personally questioning them. And so that becomes an issue in the military as well. So it's a quagmire of shit half the time, or three-quarters of the time.
Well, and this is certainly something we're going to get into when we get to Omar Bradley and Patton.
True.
The idea of what do you do with your superior officer or your inferior officer when you don't quite agree? Yeah. After this in the 30s, Patton really seems like he hits a real midlife crisis. He's drinking a lot. His career isn't going where he thinks it should go. There's no war for him to fight. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do. And at the same time that Patton's going a little bit downhill, Eisenhower goes to Panama with General Connor to organize troops there. And this is where Ike evolved, because Connor gave him philosophy to read. He pushed him on leadership. He had to deal with logistics, cooperations with a different country because they're in Panama. And he learned how to work in the system. And Patton, of course, is the opposite. Can't figure out how to work inside the system. What Patton saw systems as is dogma.
Yeah.
Here's what he said to Eisenhower. He said, we talk and talk, but never get to brass tacks. What is it that gets that poor SOB to fight? And in what formation is he going to fight? The answer to the first is leadership, but the second, I don't know. And he says to Ike, you should stop thinking about moving supplies and start thinking about how to get the army to move under fire, because victory in the next war depends on execution, not plans.
You see, and that's just very clear what his mentality is,
Yep.
right? And this is also what subsequently leads to his downfall for the most part, is this idea of not being able to see the bigger picture and only what's in front of him and bull his way into victory, right? Not looking at the overall things that should be happening, in this situation. It's clear. It's very clear.
General Marshall becomes chief of staff just as World War II is beginning. And here is what the ranks of these three guys is in 1940. Patton has become a 2-star general.
Wow, already.
Ike is a full bird colonel. Omar is a lieutenant colonel. But Marshall sees something in Omar Bradley. He says, this guy is special. And he sends him off to some military academy. I can't remember which one. It's not West Point. And he promotes him up to a brigadier general. So skips colonel entirely in order to, and he basically, Omar Bradley becomes like the premier troop trainer in the country. Like, he is the guy, and they send him from base to base to get troops into shape right before World War II. They set up a major war game, huge war games, and the two people commanding the two off armies is Patton versus Eisenhower. Day one, Ike wins.
Right.
Day two, Patton breaks all the rules. I'm totally picturing the Dirty Dozen, and he totally wins.
Yeah.
And gets a lot of credit.
He pulls a Kirk. Yeah.
After Pearl Harbor, Marshall realizes he needs someone top-notch on his staff, and he writes to General Clark, who's a very important general in World War II, and he says, send me a list of the 10 best officers in the country to come onto my staff. And General Clark says, look, I can send you a list, but it's just going to be one name written 10 times, Dwight David Eisenhower. And so Marshall goes to meet Ike. They've never met before. And here's the meeting. Imagine this is your job interview. This general lays out the entire world situation, every army, every troop, every ally, every troop position, what the supplies lines are. And he says, what would you do? And Ike says, can I have an hour to think about it? And Marshall says, yes, you can have 1 hour. And Ike goes away for an hour. And he comes back and he lays out an entire strategy for the world military situation.
Wow.
And what Marshall said is that it didn't even matter whether or not he agreed with the strategy. He needed somebody who could make decisions on his own.
Yeah.
Somebody who could think for themselves. And that man was Eisenhower. And it's so funny because, we just saw Hamilton. Ike becomes his right-hand man.
Yeah.
He's a right-hand man.
Right.
And so now suddenly Ike is superior to Patton. And Patton has to come to Ike to get a job. 6 months earlier, Ike was begging Patton to give him a job. And
welcome to the world, kids.
Yeah.
Welcome to the world. You never know.
Literally, I can't tell you what, when I met you guys and I met Vogel and Ross, they came to ask me for a job. And then a few years later, I was asking them for a job. So it definitely happens that way.
You just never know.
And Patton, there's the situation in Africa is going on, and they know that's where they're going to send their troops first. And Ike suggests Patton for Africa. And Patton goes to Marshall and says, look, I won't do it unless you give me 2 divisions. I need 2 divisions to do this. And Marshall says, you only get 1. He says, no, you have to give me 2 divisions. And Marshall ices him. He won't return his phone calls. He won't communicate with him. He just completely shuts him down. And Patton is writing to Eisenhower and everybody else he knows, like, look, I'm sorry. You got to get me this job. I really want. I'll do it with 1 division. I'll do it with, just give me a platoon, whatever you want. And Marshall totally did it on purpose. He knew that he was going to have Patton do the job. He just needed to show him who was boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Marshall, by the way, handles everybody really well. He's one of and this is, of course, when you hear the Marshall Plan, that's who we're talking about. Right. So all 3 of these guys, Patton, Bradley, and Ike, they all knew each other. They all had sort of developed in the same time between World War I and World War II. They all came to be known by General Marshall, who knew these 3 guys were going to be really important in the war. And that leads us to where we are in the film. And the way this film starts is it starts with General Frank McCarthy, who served under Marshall. Mm-hmm. And after the war, he went to work at Fox under Daryl Zanuck and became a producer. And he continually, from about 1953, kept saying, I want to make a movie about Patton. And they tried it in all sorts of different ways. They even went to the Patton family and said, look, we want your permission. We want to make this movie about George Patton, who had passed away already. Mm-hmm. And the day that they went to see the Pattons was the day that Mrs. Patton, George's wife, died, day after she died.
Wow.
Their timing was poor.
Yes.
And the Patton family said, no way, you're a bunch of jerks. They tried to make this movie for 7 years. Finally, in 1960, they shelved it. We're not going to do this. Then, and Zanuck has left Fox. Then he comes back to Fox with his son, Richard Zanuck, and his partner, David Brown, who was Zanuck and Brown that made Jaws and The Sting and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. And they revived this idea of Patton. And they hired this young 24-year-old kid named Francis Ford Coppola to write the screenplay. Coppola writes a crazy screenplay, particularly for 1963. Mm-hmm. You know, this is not where the world is. And what Coppola says is it was particularly the opening, that big speech that's so famous that everyone looked at, like they wanted Burt Lancaster to play Patton.
Oh, wow. And
Lancaster looked at this script that had this speech and poetry and reincarnation. He's like, this movie's way too weird. I don't want to do this.
Can't do it, fellas.
Yeah.
It's too weird. Yeah. And
they shelve it again. And they drop Coppola's option, and it goes away again for 5 or 6 more years until they bring on Edmund North to write a new version of the script. And they call up George C. Scott, who Coppola says he pictured George C. Scott in the role from the beginning. No. That's who he wrote it for. Mm-hmm. And Scott looks at it and goes, I don't really like the script, and I don't like Patton. I don't want to do this.
Right.
And they go, oh, you don't like this script? And they, well, hold on a sec. And they show him the Coppola script. They had only showed him the Edmund North script. He sees the Coppola script and he goes, okay, I'll do it, except I will not do that opening speech. He says, if we have the speech be the opening of this movie, it'll ruin the rest of the movie because nothing will live up to it.
Wow.
And it's weird too, because when does that speech take place? Exactly. You know, It's a very strange thing.
It's a good point.
And Schaffner, the director, who had just come off of doing Planet of the Apes, also with Zanuck and Fox, says, oh, you know what? We've decided to move the speech. We're going to put it before Act 2, right after the intermission. And George C. Scott goes, okay, I'll do it. And they never had any intention of putting it there. They just needed him to shoot the scene.
Of course.
And at this point, too, they've brought on Omar Bradley. He had written his book, A Soldier's Story, I think it is. And Omar Bradley becomes the consultant on the film. He's there on the set all the time, which is really, really weird.
I'm sure for Carl Malden, it must be incredibly weird. Yeah.
Well, and for Omar Bradley, who there's a very strong argument that he is way more important than Patton.
Sure.
In terms of winning that war.
But it's not a character.
Yeah, to be helping out on the movie about this guy who he had a lot of problems with is pretty weird.
Yeah.
And again, you know, as we said, like now we're in the midst of Vietnam. And so there's this weird pressure on this movie. It is both a old school war movie and it is a 70s Vietnam era movie too.
Yeah.
So would you like to get into this film?
Let's do it. I'm excited.
I don't know what to say about this opening. Like,
it's maybe the greatest opening of any film ever, honestly.
It is so unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
We're staring at just a giant American flag, and up from the steps from below rises General Patton. And I love how they framed it because his feet are like right at the bottom of the frame.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're looking on a stage.
Well, it's also perfect, Steve, because you hear the chatter. And having been in the military, that's what you all sit around and shooting, talking, probably talking about, what's this speech going to be, blah, blah, blah. And then you hear, 10 hut!
10 hut!
And then you hear the feet shift.
Yep.
And silence. And I think that's brilliant, right? It gets you right into the mood of a military film. Also gets you into the mood, or also gets you the idea that this guy commands this kind of attention, this level of attention.
And you hear Revelry. I think it's Revelry, isn't it? The plays?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not Revelry, though. It's bum ba dun 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 dun. And then we have this moment where he's just standing there, so imposing. And we and we cut to these inserts of the medals and the 4 stars and the ivory-handled revolvers and his eyes under the helmet. And it's just like, what is happening?
And it's old school, isn't it? Like, okay, you're going to respect this guy. You've seen the medals. It's a way of tricking the audience into thinking it's going to be an old school kind of war film in the way. And you know, immediately it's showing the audience you have to respect this man. He's earned these things immediately. So before he even starts, you as an audience member are a 10 hut and command, you know, your attention is completely on him and what he's about to say.
And then what he says is so unlike anything we've ever heard from a general. And apparently, according to Coppola, these are all just this like 5 or 6 Patton speeches.
Yes.
And almost every line of this is not a thing that he said as a whole, but almost every line that is in there are things that he said.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country.
The speech serves as a foreshadowing for what's going to happen in the rest of the movie. And so I get George C. Scott's hesitation about the speech being at the beginning of the movie, like, oh, nothing else is going to live up to it. But the whole point of the speech is to lay groundwork for what you're about to watch throughout the entire movie, Patton's journey.
Well, and he's also framing things for the soldiers in such a way, he's modeling a certain view of life.
Yeah.
Americans traditionally love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle.
How much resonance does that have, Steve? Real Americans. We keep hearing it all the time nowadays in the political spectrum over the last few years. This idea of what's a real American. You know, real Americans do this. Real Americans are real patriots and all of that crap, you know. So you hear him using it here. It takes a whole nother level on nowadays.
Well, and he's so framing a classically male testosterone filled version of what success is.
You all admired the champion marble shooter, the fastest runner, big league ball players, the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war.
Do you remember, because it came up in our Civil War documentary, what what's his name? The great interview.
Shelby Foote?
Yeah. Do you remember what Shelby Foote said about this line in this movie?
No. Can you remind me?
He said that's very ironic coming from a guy whose grandfather fought for the Confederacy. His ancestors did lose a war.
Yeah. But they weren't Americans because they were treasonous towards America. So maybe technically he's correct.
The other thing about it is that we're in the midst of Vietnam.
Yes. See, this is what I mean. It's an anti-war film. It's a protest film. Him talking about Americans never losing a war in the middle of Vietnam as we're losing that war. It's really interesting.
Listen, some of the lines are so brutal and vile and intense and proud and strange. Like,
My God, I actually pity those poor bastards we're going up against. By God, I do. We're not just going to shoot the bastards. We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. We're going to murder those lousy Hun bastards by the bushel.
I mean, that is just like...
Hey, man. You got to get psyched up for war, Steve.
Apparently.
We are advancing constantly, and we're not interested in holding on to anything except the enemy. We're going to hold on to him by the nose, and we're going to kick him in the ass. We're going to kick the hell out of him all the time, and we're going to go through him like crap through a goose.
And then again, framing what, because this is his worldview. I want to be in the middle of the battle. That's his whole life goal. Everything is made meaningful by him being in the battle.
Right? Even that section of the speech where he says,
some of you boys, I know, are wondering whether or not you'll chicken out under fire. Don't worry about it. I can assure you that you will all do your duty. The Nazis are the enemy. Wade into them. Spill their blood. Shoot them in the belly. When you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do.
And it's that little thing of he's building the confidence into the soldiers, but he's not lying to them about the experiences they're going to go through. And that particular moment connects to when he slaps the kid in the tent, right? This idea that he's heard other people say they're not sure how they're going to react under fire. And he's trying to say, no, you guys will be fine. So to have a soldier who isn't fine under his command is why he reacts in this manner, you know? And so it's all there throughout the speech, what's to come.
And the last thing he says is, or not the last thing he says, and as he's finishing up, he says, 30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside and your grandson on your knee, and he asks you,
what did you do in the Great World War II? You won't have to say, well, I shoveled shit in Louisiana.
Which is what? Where's the shades of this speech? Once again, this idea of Henry V, right? Henry V says that, right? Yearly on the vigil, whenever St. Crispin's Day happens, those of you who fought will strip your shirts and show the scars that you earned fighting upon St. Crispin's Day. I'm paraphrasing what he says there, but basically saying you'll be the biggest man in the room on that day, or you'll have the greatest respect from everybody around you because you fought, right? And same thing here. Instead of shoveling shit in Louisiana, you fought in the war, and you'll have pride for that. You know,
it's so funny because I'm sure when I was 12 or 13, and really probably as a young man watching this, a big, huge part of me was just going, yeah,
of course,
you know, and looking at it now, I have such a different view because this is like, what does it mean to be a man? And this is the traditional, like, you're going to be a warrior, you're going to be a fighter, you're going to be the best, you're going to be competitive, you're going to be tough, you're not going to show pain, you're not going to show fear, all those things. And I'll tell you, I think I said this a long time ago on the show, but in working with Hoover with people who are from Afghanistan, because he was embedded with the Mujahideen during the war against the Soviets. Yeah. And one of the problems the CIA had training these fighters is that they walked into battle standing up. They wouldn't duck. They wouldn't hide. They wouldn't go for cover. They wouldn't hide behind. There was like, and the reason is they had to show that they were a man. Showing any kind of fear, hiding would be unhonorable. And the word for this is herat. That is what the honorable way a man is supposed to be. And their definition of herat is doing that which is hardest. That a man does the hard thing. And the thing that I thought about so much is like, well, how hard was it for your dad or for my dad to show weakness?
Right. So, very difficult.
Extreme. Like he couldn't do it. Like my dad would, was literally on his deathbed and wouldn't complain or say he was afraid or anything. And I went, oh, well, what is hardest? Maybe these things that we were saying is what it is to be a man that seem really hard are not hardest.
Yep. It cost me years of conversations with my dad and arguments and fights for him to finally let the guard down near the tail end of his life and be vulnerable and emotional and sensitive with me because of that, because of the old school feel and machismo of what's a man. And look, that's still within me, Steve, for all the supposedly progressive nature of myself and how I see the world and want to destroy toxic masculinity. I still like the feeling of the old school bravado of man. I still gravitate to it, but I also like to question it when it's fake. There are people who can carry that mantle and it's real, and there are other people who it's all bluster to cover up the fact that they're afraid. And so you analyze all of that on a case-by-case basis. But for, like I said, for my dad, it took a long, long time, a lot of fights before he eventually understood that there's strength in actually talking about your feelings, strength in actually taking a chance to be ridiculed, to be called a name, to be made fun of for talking about your feelings. That's true strength. Holding on to it is how you blow up or have, get the health issues because you're not expressing yourself.
I still struggle with this so much too. And like the way it manifests itself for me is I feel like it's my responsibility to solve problems, other people's problems, So like my wife is in trouble or my son or my wife's family, or I feel like no one's dealing with this thing. I need to be the one to stand in front of the moving train and try to save people. And I do it not only to the detriment of those people, because I actually am taking agency away from them.
Yes.
But I'm doing it to the detriment of myself and my health and my peace of mind and all these things, because I feel these responsibilities that no one said you had to do that.
Right.
Like, that's not your responsibility.
To you, that is what's hardest.
That's what's hardest.
So you attach a feeling of manhood to that.
Yeah, I would rather do really, really hard work than let other people just live their lives as they're living them. That's how crazy I am. And I think, we spent a lot of time just on this one speech, but as you say, it's one of the most amazing openings to a movie. And I think the whole movie is here.
Yeah.
All the mix of, wow, this is an amazing person and I'm not comfortable with this. And this is what we should do. This isn't what we should do. Maybe this whole thing is, it's like very complicated. And I'll say just one more thing about it. So after the film comes out, Coppola is in the midst of making The Godfather. And they're in pre-production, and the opening scene of The Godfather is at this wedding. I don't know who it was, one of his associates comes up to him and he goes, you know what? It's kind of weird. I mean, we're establishing all this information at this wedding, but it's not all that dramatic. Man, if only you could do something like you did in Patton, where you had just that really intense speech as an opening. And that is where the opening of The Godfather comes from, is where we start with that close-up. The guy says, America, and he has this whole, it is totally Coppola trying to patent The Godfather.
He stole from himself.
Isn't that awesome?
Brilliant. That's great.
The monologue ends. He says dismissed. He walks away. We go to black. And then we hear what is one of my all-time favorite movie themes, bar none.
I love the Trump fading off into the distance.
It's so, and all, by the way, it's just two notes, and then they echoed them. And this, of course, is Jerry Goldsmith. So we've done a lot of Jerry Goldsmith. I know we did Hoosiers. We just did. What was the one we just? There was one we just did. I can't remember what it is. Okay. We've done so many Jerry Goldsmith movies, and they're all falling out of my brain right now. And Planet of the Apes, of course, that's another one of my favorites. Right. But this is my favorite score of his.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was almost not on the movie.
Oh wow!
Because he was scheduled to do Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Oh God, why? Yeah.
And Zanuck said, "You're not doing that. You're doing this."
Oh no, you don't.
And this music is eerie and mystical, and it has that. I think this music has Patton's belief in reincarnation and history, right in that.
Yeah.
And we open, as you alluded to when we started, on this very disturbing images: vultures, people robbing graves, a dog that's tied up to a tank, a lot of wounded Americans that are just dead at the end of this old battlefield. And it is very much not an old school war movie.
Yeah.
These are the things you would never see.
No, right, exactly.
And up comes a Jeep, and the camera work is so, like, you think about Lawrence of Arabia, another big, huge war film. And if you compare the camera work of Lawrence of Arabia to that of Patton, you see 62 to 69, what's happened. And a soldier stands up and shoots one of the vultures. And we see Carl Malden for the first time as Omar Bradley. And we hear a rundown of everything we've lost, culminating with 1,800 men. And we see, the last thing we see is this dog tied to a tank. Nobody's going to save that dog. That dog's dead. Hard cut to Morocco. And Patton receiving this medal, and there's all this pageantry, and it's just completely ridiculous. And Patton says as these troops go by marching,
magnificent. I wish our troops looked that good.
Does he mean that?
I don't know. Because he's not a political guy, so maybe he's trying to mean that, or, maybe he does mean it. I don't know.
I think what's interesting about him is he has certain diplomatic skills that come out in this scene. It comes out when he throws the dinner party, because he has a certain upbringing and elegance to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he cannot keep his damn mouth shut at other times.
Tell me, General, what do you think of Morocco?
I love it, Excellency. It's a combination of the Bible and Hollywood.
there's not enough things we can say about George C. Scott in his performance.
Oh, man. Just incredible. Like, because whenever I read about Patton now, it's George C. Scott's face I see. It's such a great personification of the man. And you feel the brusqueness and at times the emptiness of Patton through George C. Scott. He is a man who is tortured by his own behavior, tortured by his inability to stop his self-destructive impulses. In these, he could have achieved greatness. Dwight Eisenhower became president. Yep. Patton could have been president, but he had these unfortunate pieces of himself where he could not stop himself from expressing his honest opinion about situations rather than being political. Yeah.
And it's funny reading this book. It's way worse than what's in the movie.
Oh, I'm sure.
There's so many things where it's like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. What are you doing? And it literally is like, you've just done something great, and now you do something stupid.
Right.
Back with Omar Bradley, looking at just the totally dispirited army, and Omar says,
for the American army to take a licking like that the first time it went against the Germans. Up against Rommel, what we need is the best tank man we've got. Somebody tough enough to pull this outfit together.
Patton?
Possibly.
God help us.
It's a great setup. An instant cut to Patton standing up in the truck, siren going, driving through the desert in his outfit with the goggles and the whole thing. And they go into town and they chase out the sheep as they go into town. We notice that there's a 2-star thing on the truck. There's one shot I never noticed before. There's a guy coming out of a house who's zipping his fly, following a woman out. And I'm like, oh, that was a prostitute. Like I'd never seen it before. The truck stops. Some of the guys salute. Patton salutes with his riding crop and goes inside.
Lieutenant, where's the duty officer?
I think it's at his quarters shaving.
Why isn't he here on duty?
Guess he needed to shave. We got a new commanding general due today.
And that's when he notices who he's talking to. And I love so they jump up and they salute. And I love the guy who gives this sort of sheepish half smile.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you got me. Maybe I can connect with you on some human level. With someone else, might have worked.
Yeah. Oh, you don't buy this pomp and circumstance, right? It's you and me, dog. And he was like, no, he's the wrong dog.
It's the wrong dog, definitely. And then we see Patton turn a corner and we hear, who the hell's kicking me in the butt? And we go in and we see that Patton has literally tripped over someone.
What were you doing down there, soldier?
Trying to get some sleep, sir.
No. Get back down there, son. You're the only son of a bitch in this headquarters knows what he's trying to do.
It's great.
Yeah.
And now we see that Omar's there, and we go through a little beat where we hear that really Omar was there to just spy on Patton for Ike, and Patton calls up Ike and says, hey, can I have Omar as my second? Yep, you're my second.
Done and done. It's also a classic film trope, right? To use the tough guy coming in to shake all these guys out and teach them how discipline, blah, blah, blah. You know, you see, and same thing in Hoosiers, right? I mean, Hackman coming in as a kind of a hard ass, teach these guys a little bit of discipline. You know, that one guy, Buddy, smiles at him and tries and leaves with the other guy who ends up coming back to the team. But yeah, Buddy's like smiling. And, oh, you just let us know when practice starts. Get out. You know, so it's that kind of thing. So it's a classic trope in that way.
What I think is interesting in this one, though, is that there is no question that this army needs discipline.
Yes.
Omar agrees with that. They need that. The question is, do they need what Patton does? And reading the book, Omar totally disagreed with many of the things that he did because they were unnecessarily cruel. Mm-hmm. Like Omar was a great troop trainer as well, but just didn't think you had to be an asshole. And of course, the thing that George is doing is he's got some guys taking those 2 stars off his uniform and replacing them with 3.
What's the matter, Brad? I've been nominated by the president.
I know, but it doesn't become official until it's approved by the Senate.
Well, they have their schedule and I have mine.
And they look out the window and they're replacing the 2 stars on the truck with 3 stars. And Omar softens pretty quickly. He says,
George, if you were named Admiral of the Turkish Navy, I believe your aides could dip into their haversacks and come up with the appropriate badge of rank. Anyway, congratulations. Premature congratulations.
Here's the thing about Omar Bradley and Patton. obviously their relationship is going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
Patton always liked Omar, and he thought it was reciprocal. And Omar, there are times that he liked him, and there are definitely times he appreciated him, but the feelings were not mutual.
Yeah.
He just knew how to keep his feelings to himself.
Which is why Omar becomes successful. Politics, again, he's being political.
There's one other thing I put in my Kasserine report. Some of our boys were just plain scared.
That's understandable. Even the best foxhounds are gun shy the first time out. I can remember when nothing frightened me as much as the idea of a bullet coming straight for my nose. I don't know why, but the image of a bullet coming right for my nose was more horrible than any other possibility.
Well, I can understand that, George, with such a handsome nose.
Let's be real clear. Neither of these guys have nice noses.
True.
You want to know why this outfit got the hell kicked out of it? Blind man could see it in a minute. They don't look like soldiers. They don't act like soldiers. Why should they be expected to fight like soldiers?
You're absolutely right. The discipline's pretty poor.
About 15 minutes, we're going to start turning these boys into fanatics, razors. They'll lose their fear of the Germans. Only hope to God they never lose their fear of me.
Oof. Yeah.
We go to the mess, and again, the cook comes out, who's had, you can see his relationship with the previous general. That he brought him the special, marmalade or something that he had, you know what I mean? Like he had a special relationship, and he comes out smiling. This is not that guy.
Am I to understand that all my officers have finished breakfast?
Well, we're open from 6 to 8. Most of the officers just coming in, sir.
Please inform these officers that the mess hall is closed.
But sir, it's only 1:45, Aide.
No, and you will open at 6, and no one will be admitted after 6:15. Where are your leggings?
Leggings? Well, hell, General, sir, I'm a cook.
You're a soldier. $20 fine.
From this moment on, any man without a helmet, leggings, tie, unshined shoes, soiled uniform is going to be skinned.
Yeah.
The tie is one of the ones that Omar Bradley thought was ridiculous. Like we're in a war zone. Like we don't need to wear a tie. It's not part of the standard uniform for that situation.
Well, Omar, you don't understand. The tie makes a man feel important. So what he's doing is important, so he'll give his best effort. That's the logic behind that.
Did you serve under a any crazy disciplinarian like Patton?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding? Yeah, of course. I mean, we had two guys who I served under who were hard asses like crazy. They were best friends. So I guess because certain factions would go up and serve, and one was called, his nickname was Robo Drill, because he never stopped, and he was like a machine, and it was insane, and he demanded the best of you. But they're like the best in the military. He pushed you past your comfort zones, but never to the point where he wouldn't be understanding. I remember he tricked me one time as Joel Sergeant Thompson. That's his name, Sergeant Thompson. I came up to him after I'd finished basic training. I'd gone on to my AIT, and I went up to him and I said, listen, they put me in charge of a squad in basic training, and I don't like that responsibility. I just want to keep my mouth closed. I want to keep my head down and just do the job and learn my training and move on to my next post. And he said, don't worry, Private, don't worry. I remember this was late at night after the first or second night we were there. Don't worry, Private, don't worry, Private. Next morning, he demotes the squad leader and assigns me squad leader status of the entire. And I was just shocked. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, Joseph, did you misunderstand what I said? I didn't say to put me. I said, he goes, oh no, I understood you, Private. And that's why you're taking the position that you're taking. Because you can't get through this man's army picking and choosing what you can be. I can see what you can be, even if you can't. And then he just walked away. And I just remember, that was such a shock to me. And from that point on, he was hard on me about being, so I could be hard on the other guys. It was a weird thing. So it was like certain experiences you have in the military, you just carry on with you. And they know which ones they can push. The good ones do. And they know which ones they can't. And he was hard. But the reason he was hard is because he wanted to build pride within yourself about the things you were doing. you know? And so
what do you feel about that? What do you feel about that now? Are you glad?
Not
that
a
he did
negative
it?
feeling at all. Not a negative feeling at all. Because I think sometimes people who are a little soft, and I mean soft mentally, don't understand that. I don't mean mentally like mental health. I mean soft mentally, and they don't push themselves. They don't understand that. Like that you have to be pushed sometimes as a human being to accomplish what you can accomplish. And if you don't want to be pushed, then stop talking about your dreams. Stop talking about the things you want to accomplish in this world. Because if you're not going to make an effort to make those dreams happen, even a little bit of effort, then you should stop talking about it, because people will invest in your dreams and will want you to give your best effort to achieve that, you know? And listen, I'm not the easiest person to get along with sometimes in terms of relationships, and that has bit me in the ass sometimes in relationships with other people. And so those are the things that I carry on my own, and I'm very hard on myself as a result, you know, for better or worse, because I expect to do well in everything I commit myself to, and that's built out of that. But I have no negative feelings about that because it wasn't abusive, right? I don't think Patton's abusive. I think Patton has a strategy. He has a morality. He has things that work. Like in that near the end of the movie, he was talking about moving his soldiers under a certain time, and they said, "Do you think your soldiers will do it?" No, they don't do it because they love me. They do it because I've trained them to do it. And there's a difference, right? So sometimes people rule by making everybody hate you, because then you all come together against Patton. But you're still coming together to be disciplined, and you'll get the job done. Because you hate me, you'll get the job done. You know, some guys are built that way. Bradley wasn't. Bradley was a little bit softer. And so his way is a little more touchy-feely in comparison. And that works too. For certain people, that works. Patton's way was different, for better or worse. It was just different.
So I think you kind of hit on what is one of the key themes of the whole film, and something I think we'll discuss throughout. Yeah, which is because what's interesting is there's a difference. There's a difference between the leader pushing the follower and how that manifests itself, and you pushing yourself. Right. You know, and so I think Patton pushes himself the way he pushes other people.
Yes,
but. What's interesting to me, like today, particularly in California, in this very progressive world, and I think about the school that my son goes to, Patton is out.
Oh yeah, you can't put that stuff now. You can't pull that
today. Stuff. It is very much like because we can use positive and negative reinforcement to train people to do things. So we do carrots and sticks, and Patton is basically all stick.
Yeah, it's all stick.
Yes. And my son's school is only carrot. To the point where they have discipline problems because, you know, they always go, well, obviously if the child is acting out, they must need some more love, you know, and it's like, look, that tactic works sometimes. It doesn't work for everybody. And the thing is like, I think you at that moment with that drill sergeant, you needed to be pushed.
Right.
And he saw that. He said, this person is not going to live up to their potential unless I push them. I am sure there are other times in your lives, because I've had both experiences where I needed to be helped.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about this is Patton is one note. You know, and because I think about because there's, as I say, there's a difference between like your individual achievement and leadership. And because I teach directing and have been a director, I think a lot about leadership and what does it mean and how do we go about doing it. And in film, we've had a lot of Pattons as directors.
Yes,
and we've had some Omar Bradleys. You know, like we've had. And by the way, he was not soft. He was efficient. He just didn't have a temper. I mean, I shouldn't even say that.
Just a difference. Yeah.
He had a temper, but he wasn't Patton.
Which is why there's no movies about it. But also, the thing is, there's no general rule, is there, Steve? Like, you're discovering that as a dad yourself, I'm sure. Like, every kid is different. And yes, there are some things that will work with a certain group of kids and some things that will work with another group of kids. And, you know, in sports, the best managers are the ones that know how to manage each individual player on their team in a certain way. They understand. They're not system coaches. They're man player or they're player coaches. They understand how to motivate their team. So some people know how to do that and some people don't. The best do. With what my problem with Patton was, and this is ironic in the movie because it doesn't get really touched on, and maybe throughout the book as you read it, the problem with Patton is that he doesn't even 100% believe in what he's doing, because every time people push back, then he's like, oh, no, I'll do it with less divisions. I'll do it. So his way of stating his energy or his presence or whatever is to say, no, this is what I need, and screw you if you don't give it to me. And then they don't give it to him, and he can't live with the consequences, and he backtracks. And the backtracking is where you lose the real strength and foundation of the belief of what you're doing. And that frustrated me as I was watching the movie. Every time he was made to grovel instead of to accept the consequences, because his real desire, which was to fight, to be a warrior, is what drove his life. And there's that great scene at the end where the German guy says, I don't know what this guy's going to do without a war to fight. What's Patton going to do without a war to fight? Because that's all he's ever known.
Well, and I think with Patton, it's all about ego. It's all about him.
Of course.
And that's the big fallacy, is that if your motivation was pure, we can't know that his motivation is pure or that he's doing the right thing because his motivations aren't pure.
Right.
And sometimes serving his ego is successful.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. He shows up at the hospital.
I understand you have 2 cases of self-inflicted wounds.
Yes, sir, we do.
Get him out of here.
Well, sir, one of them's developed a very serious infection.
Well, I don't care if he dies. Just get him someplace, but out of here. He doesn't belong in the same building with men who've been wounded in battle.
And the looks that go between the doctors is so clear. And then he says,
there'll be no battle fatigue in my command. That's an order.
Yes, sir.
Battle fatigue is a free ride. Yellow Belly's ticket to the hospital. I'm not going to subsidize cowardice.
And then he even pushes the doctor, like, you got to wear a helmet. It's like, well, I can't put my stethoscope on with a helmet. We'll cut some holes in your helmet then.
Interesting, right? Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and this is the unreasonable leader. It's like, like Patton is going to get what he wants literally to a fault.
But some people watch these sequences and they love it.
Mm-hmm.
Other people watch these sequences, and I wonder in 1970 when this came out, what's the reaction of other people? Because him saying the yellow bellied or all that, I mean, we're knee deep in Vietnam. How many people were sending letters back home going, I got afraid or I got scared, or the sound? And these are 17, 18-year-old kids, 19-year-old kids being thrown into Southeast Asia in a jungle to fight some foreign enemy that they can barely see. How are they going to react to it? The protests. That's essentially a shot at the protest. The yellow-bellied people, blah blah blah. He's taking a shot at the protesters a little bit in that as well. So it's a very interesting thing. Am I supposed to like Patton or not? And throughout the movie, I think by the end of the movie, only you can make that decision.
Well, I think this movie's like a perfect wedge at the generation gap.
Yes,
and a perfect wedge at the political gap, because if you are a hippie in 1970 and going to Vietnam War protests, you're going, see, that's the problem.
Right.
It's a military mentality that to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They just only know how to kick ass, and they're not caring, and they're creating more violence. But if you are, there are many people during the Vietnam War who felt the problem with Vietnam was you didn't let the U.S. Army off its leash.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let it go be the real killers they need to be in order to win the damn war. They're being too timid. And so they would look at this and go, yeah, this is what we need. Where is George S. Patton? We need to send him to Vietnam.
Right.
And finally win this war. The reason we're losing is we're not doing it for real.
And the people are protesting, and that's affecting the morale of the soldiers. You yellow-bellied,
get them the hell out of here.
Right, you yellow-bellied who won't fight because you're sitting there protesting in the street or fleeing to Canada. You're affecting the morale of the soldiers. So some people felt that way. Yeah.
Hold it. Turn right here.
Sir, the battlefield is straight ahead.
Please don't argue with me, Sergeant. I can smell a battlefield.
He was out here just yesterday, George.
It's over there. Turn right, damn it.
And they turn right, and they get to these ruins, and there is that mysterious music.
It was here. The battlefield was here. The Carthaginians defending the city were attacked by 3 Roman legions. The Carthaginians were proud and brave, but they couldn't hold. They were massacred.
And he kneels down.
Arab women stripped them of their tunics and their swords and lances. The soldiers lay naked in the sun.
It is a weird scene. And it's the first time you go like, who is this guy?
2,000 years ago, I was here.
And Patton really had these beliefs.
Yeah.
This is the other scene that Coppola believes that he was fired from the script for.
Oh, wow.
Because it's really weird, And he reads his own poetry.
That's weird. I don't think some people do believe that they are of past lives, and Shirley MacLaine certainly felt that way.
Patton, Shirley MacLaine, same.
Yeah. Shirley was a hard ass herself. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff, some of the great people really do believe that they were something great. Because nobody ever goes, oh yeah, I was a homeless guy in a past life, or I was it's always something great, right? So I was there.
I love, that's such a great point. It's like, well, somebody had to be the homeless guy in the past life.
Right? I died of a bubonic plague in a past life. And,
I was a poor schlub that did nothing important at all.
Yeah, exactly.
It appears now, that we could split the African Corps, drive through Rommel to the sea.
I'm sorry, Bill, but that territory's been reserved for General Sir Bernard Law Montgomery.
Who's been the most successful British officer pushing Rommel back across Africa.
They're entitled to have their hero. After all, Montgomery did push Rommel clear across North Africa.
What about the Americans? Don't they need a hero, too?
You have anybody in mind, George?
I love it.
George Patton is so obvious.
Oh, yeah.
And now we have a meeting with the British officer, and the meeting is about air power.
We're supposed to have Allied air cover, and we don't get it. German planes are constantly strafing my troops.
If I may say so, General, I'm afraid your operations reports are inaccurate.
Reports? 3 days ago, the Krauts took off after my command car, ran my ass into a ditch.
And I promise you one thing, General. You will see no more German planes.
Cut to German planes that just come in on multiple strafing runs. We all duck down. The room's getting shot to pieces. Patton jumps out the window, climbs down.
I love it.
Come on, you bastards! Take a shot at me right in the nose!
Get back in here, George. We need a Corps commander, not a casualty.
Why does he say right in the nose?
Well, wasn't him and Bradley talking about the nose thing earlier? So maybe there's a connection there.
It's totally what I think it is. And I think because his big fear, the nightmare he had, was getting shot in the nose. I think this is him facing his fear specifically. Yeah. This really happened. He really was in the meeting demanding more air power, and the British officer was really saying that we have total air supremacy when a German attack happened.
That's great.
He did not jump out the window and open fire. That did not happen.
Patton.
How the devil did you manage to stage that?
And Patton really did say,
I don't know, but if I could find the Nazi sumbitches that are flying those things, I'd give them each a medal.
We're at a cemetery. Again, we're hearing that mysterious theme. And Patton and his aide, Dick, are walking over the hill in the distance.
Rommel's out there somewhere waiting for me. If I had my way, I'd send that genius son of a bitch an engraved invitation in iambic pentameter. A challenge and 2 standards to meet me out there alone in the desert. Rommel in his tank and me in mine. We'd stop about 20 paces, we'd get out, we'd shake hands, and we'd button up and we'd do battle, just the 2 of us. And that battle would decide the outcome of the war.
Do you think he means it?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if he meant it.
Think so too.
Yeah, just mano a mano. Yeah, it's old school
romantic
tough stuff. Yeah.
And then the last thing he says is, put a 24-hour guard on this cemetery. Our graves aren't going to disappear like everyone else's who fought here. The Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians. We hear a lot about the Greeks and Romans and Carthaginians in this movie. Mm-hmm. And what I think is so interesting, this is the 3rd time we've kind of hit this. We opened with after the monologue, we opened with this scene of what was happening. Yeah. The bodies were being robbed. And then when he goes to the battlefield, he says after the war, the Arabs stripped the bodies. Yeah. And now this is the 3rd time. And he says, we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And last thing he says is,
God, how I hate the 20th century.
Yep.
We're in Germany, and now we meet Steiger, the researcher hired to do research on Patton, and he's telling Rommel about the information he has, that he's rich, father went to West Point, etc. And he says, "You're not telling me anything about the man. I need to know something about him." And he says he prays on his knees, curses like a stable boy, and always takes the offensive. I think the casting of Rommel is great.
Oh, yeah.
There's something about him that is so interesting for how little time he's on screen.
Yeah, he's unknowable. Like he's
yeah.
You can tell he's a very proud man, but he's a man who's intelligent, smart, doesn't look past his foe, isn't swaggering or cocky, but also legitimately interested in who he's fighting and knowledgeable about what he's doing. So it allows you to create in your own mind what kind of person Rommel is overall.
Patton is in bed. He's been reading Rommel's book on tanks when someone comes in and says Rommel is attacking. We see tanks moving, and now Patton is getting dressed, and he is being dressed almost like royalty. Like Patton's comfort with servants doing things for him it's really odd to me, but it seems so natural for him.
Yeah. Well, because he thinks he's great, so therefore he should be feted upon.
And there's his helmet that has like the goggles on the helmet, and a guy stands behind him and puts it on him like a crown.
Yeah.
It's really weird scene.
I would legitimately hate that.
Me too.
Yeah.
All my life, I've wanted to lead a lot of men in a desperate battle. I'm going to do it.
It's about him.
It's all about him.
It's all about him.
Well, and this is why he's not trustworthy. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is because we can't know if he's doing this because this is the right military choice or because this is what he wants for him.
Yeah.
You know, we're in the battle. He's looking through binoculars.
Commence firing. Fire at will.
Commence firing. Fire at will. Commence firing. Fire at will.
This is a big battle. This is more tanks than I'd ever seen in a battle up to this point.
Yeah.
Lots of tanks, lots of explosions, lots of troops. By the way, this battle was way bigger than what we're seeing. This was a huge, huge tank battle.
Tell him to hit him hard on the right flank. Here's where we hold my nose. Kick him in the ass. Come on.
His leadership style in this moment, I love. The confidence, the intensity, he's more friendly.
Because he's happier. He's doing what he wants to do, which is be in battle. So you're going to get the best personality of Patton you can get, especially if you think he's going to win.
And so this is Dick, his aide, that goes off to find Omar, gets out of the Jeep, and then a strafing run comes in and Dick gets killed. And Omar sees it.
Yeah.
The battle, I would say, is not clear. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know who's going where or exactly what's happening.
Right.
And Patton lowers his binoculars and he smiles and says, "You magnificent bastard, I read your book."
I love that. I read your book. I love that.
George C. Scott's delivery is so totally unique, the way this guy talks. And then we cut to silence and Dick's corpse covered in a flag in a cart, and we hear
Captain Richard N. Jensen was a fine boy. Loyal, unselfish, and efficient.
And he touches his face.
There are no coffins here since there's no wood. We will have a trumpeter and an honor guard, but we will not fire the volleys as it would make people think an air raid was on.
I don't know why, but I love that description. It's hard to explain why I think that's such good writing. Is it such a interesting description, and it summons up this moment emotionally in some way that I can't really quite explain.
I enclosed a lock of Dick's hair in a letter to his mother. He was a fine man and a fine officer, and he had no vices.
It's almost a jealousy. There's almost an envy. Not jealousy, but an envy, right? Like, you know, there's a great... We just did Chariots of Fire, right?
Yeah.
What does Abrams said? Those of us who are driven by something to achieve something, we envy those who are not. We envy those who it's okay to just get close, and it's okay that I was just in the game. You know, like when Abrams says to Aubrey, he says, "You are my most complete man. You want for nothing. You need nothing." I've never known that. I've never known that contentment, that peace. And Patton is saying the same thing here about his aide. Like, he's no vices. He's great. He was, he did everything he was supposed to do, you know. And there's an envy. He wasn't driven to achieve like I am and deal with all the bullshit that's part of it, you know. So.
And the last thing we hear his voiceover say is,
"I can't see the reason such fine young men get killed. There are so many battles yet to fight."
That's a weird twist on a line, man.
Yeah.
Because he's not saying I wish they could be alive.
Right.
He's saying we need them to fight more.
Right.
You know. By the way, Patton did keep a journal, and apparently it is a lot. Emotional, angry, jealous, vicious, nasty, sad, depressed. This guy had a lot of personality.
The dude needed to see a therapist very, very badly.
Like you said, the douche.
Oh, sorry, the dude. I meant to say the dude. The dude. The dude, I meant to say.
The Dude is a totally different movie.
He too needs to see a therapist, but all right, yeah, let's move on.
We're back with the Germans. And the big question is Patton going to attack Sardinia? We're asking Steiger this, and he goes, no. And he says, why? Well, because Patton is a historian, and he knows that Sicily has always been the key. He will attack as the Athenians did. And the general he's talking to is like, what are you talking about? This is the 20th century. And Steiger says, Patton is a 16th century man.
Excuse me, General. Sir, this is interesting. We've discovered Rommel wasn't present at El Guitar.
Are they telling me that when we took on 10th Panzer, Rommel was in Berlin with an earache?
And they say, yeah, well, he's Hitler's favorite general, and he didn't want him to lose face.
I'm my favorite general, and I don't like to be told if some second stringer is up against me. Then I lose face.
And now we meet a new character. This is Conklin.
But, General, he undoubtedly planned the German battle. If you defeat Rommel's plan, you've defeated Rommel.
That's some first-class ass kissing.
That is right.
It's like, and
I want to have a drink with you. Yeah.
He eats it up. He's like,
of course.
What's so funny? One of the reasons Patton got fired by MacArthur, and he was really happy because he didn't like MacArthur, and MacArthur, according to Patton, only surrounded himself with sycophants.
Interesting.
And it's like,
if that's the reason. Yeah.
What do we see right here? I mean, MacArthur was a prima donna, but which one was more of a prima donna is a damn good question.
Well, look, Patton says it later. I know I'm a prima donna. The problem with Montgomery is he won't admit he's a prima donna.
I love both of you, and I just can't help but speak.
They're great lines. They're delivered so well by George C. Scott.
And then Patton says to this guy who's going to be his new aide that he needs to have a fancy dinner because he wants to get his Sicily plan.
This will be strictly a formal affair, Codman, but purely social. By that I mean purely political.
And he says it's going to be a strictly formal affair, purely social. And by that, I mean purely political. And he says something in French, and the guy comes right back in French, and they talk away in French.
I want the finest food, the best wine available. Everything, comme il faut.
Entendu, mon général.
Quelque chose de vraiment spécial.
Because Patton, even though he's this foul-mouthed, gruff guy, is actually very elegant. And we cut to a very elegant dinner where wine is being poured and everyone is enjoying it. And Patton speaks some erudition about Alcibiades and the Peloponnesian, all about Sicily. And suddenly he's got a map outlining his plan.
It looks like an interesting plan, George.
Well, gentlemen, to the conquest of Sicily.
To Sicily.
And they say, oh, that's a very interesting plan. And he says a toast to the conquest of Sicily. And the last thing they say is, you'd have made a great marshal for Napoleon if you'd lived in the 18th century.
But I did, Sir Harold. I did.
And now we had kind of seen Montgomery in a newsreel before, but now we really get to meet him. He drives up to some headquarters in Algeria, I think it is, asks where Beetle Smith is. Beetle Smith was Ike's right-hand man. Apparently Beetle Smith, by the way, was a major ass kicker. Like when people were disobeying or not doing something right or not living up to Ike's expectations, he sent Beetle after them. And Beetle was scary.
Ike's his right-hand, or Beetle's his right-hand man.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But that's not how Beetle's are portrayed here. And right now, Beetle is in the lavatory. Yeah. Monty comes in. I love that he checks under the stalls. And he says, I think Patton's plan is going to be a disaster. And Beetle's like, okay. And then there's this great close-up of Monty going, and he blows onto a mirror and draws a map of Sicily and says, here's Patton's plan. And the problem is our forces will be divided and the Germans can cut us up piecemeal.
Now then, what I propose, and what I shall insist on, by the way, is this.
And I like that we saw him in that weird close-up below on the mirror. Now he goes out of frame and we're watching Beetle as we hear
Yeah.
And Beetle's expression of like, oh my God, what do I have to deal with this? And he basically outlines a plan where he's going to have the main advance and Patton is just going to be protecting his flank.
Yeah, of course.
I love that Beetle is smart enough to wipe the damn mirror down and not leave your map plan up there.
Amusing, isn't it? What? That the final plans for the invasion of Sicily should have been put forward in an Algerian lavatory.
And we cut to Patton getting the news that his plan has been rejected.
In other words, we get the burden again while good old Monty gets the glory, huh?
Ike had to consider all points of view. He made his decision not as an American, but as an ally.
And this is going to be the conflict between Patton and Ike for real for the whole rest of the war.
This is what happens when your commander stops being an American and starts being an ally.
Which, of course, isn't realistic, is it? Like, Patton is trying to be America, essentially America, you know, but there's other considerations to take here. And once again, he doesn't see the bigger picture. He doesn't understand that he has to kind of sacrifice a little bit of his ego for the overall good. Because, you know, if he does this, then down the road it'll be Montgomery who covers his flank while he does what he needs to do through the main thing. But Patton only sees self-glory here, you know?
You know what's
and he's right to point out that Monty is all about himself. Absolutely.
Sure. You know what's crazy? So we brought up Hoosiers because Jerry Goldsmith did the score.
Right.
And you brought up Hoosiers again because we were talking about the new coach coming in to discipline the troops. Here's another place that Hoosier is important, is that the way those teams played before Gene Hackman showed up is it was all about individual glory, which is what Patton's into.
Right.
Ike wants to win the war.
Yeah.
If you're going to play on the team and you play a role in the team and you don't get any glory, but your team wins, you should be happy.
Yeah, yeah.
Patton wants the Americans to get credit, and he wants himself to get credit.
Right, more than anything else, yeah.
That's his motivating factor.
Yeah.
We have some newsreel footage of Patton multiple times getting off a troop transport, walking through the water. Here's an interesting thing about this. Daryl Zanuck, one of the most important studio heads, who later becomes, you know, the producer of this picture, during World War II, there was that Five Who Came Back documentary. He was one of the guys, the Hollywood guys, who went to shoot newsreel and documentary footage in World War II. He filmed Patton in the Sicily campaign in World War II. So his guys are basically the guys that shot this stuff. I mean, in the real world, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
And we're with the Germans, and they're talking about that Patton and Montgomery are prima donnas. And then we see Bradley, and they all go, man, he looks just like a common soldier. And I love that Steiger says, he's most capable and unpretentious, unusual for a general. And the general in front of him looks back at him like, huh?
Sorry.
I don't think I've made myself clear, sir. It's true Montgomery's met the toughest resistance of the campaign there at Catania. However, if we're
perfectly clear.
Listen to George C. Scott's voice that he uses in this.
Old Monty is as stuck as a bug on flypaper.
And they go, yeah, but they've given you an order to give this route to Montgomery. And he says,
and then old Bradley will have to slug, mind you, his way up the center of the island over those tough mountain roads, won't he?
It's such a weird voice he's doing in this moment. It's so odd.
He's making fun of Montgomery.
He's making fun of Montgomery, but he's also so callous about what Brad is going to have to do because of this.
Right.
Messina. If they followed my plan, I'd be there by now. I'd cut off the retreat of every goddamn German battalion on this island.
And then he outlines his plan. You know what I'm going to do? First, I'm going to go to Palermo.
And I'm still going to beat that limey son of a bitch, Messina. It's the last thing I ever do.
And that's when Omar Bradley enters.
Hey, what's all this talk about taking the Vizzini Road away from Second Corps?
And George C. Scott, who's done nothing but bitch about the orders that he gets, says, hey, that's Alexander's orders. You got to follow orders.
Yeah.
Omar Bradley looks over at the map and says,
now, you wouldn't be taking advantage of this situation, would you, George?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, without that road, your whole army would be out of a job, free for you to go to Palermo if you felt like it.
Who said anything about Palermo?
I love this moment.
I can read a map.
What's so great, and I don't think this, like we did On the Waterfront, where Carl Malden's performance is stunning.
Yeah.
I don't think this performance is stunning at all, but you could see the wheels turn in a very simple performance.
George, are you telling me that I've got to slug it out over those mountains with heavy resistance just so you can make a bigger splash than Monty?
And I love, too, because it's so interesting in the American military that they call each other by their first names.
Yeah.
You know, the level of hierarchy is lower in the American military.
Yeah.
But at this moment, George doesn't say Brad. He says,
General, I just follow my orders, like the simple old soldier I am.
and right at that moment, in comes a message telling him to stop immediately. And George says, that's what you think it says. I think it was garbled in transmission. Ask them to retransmit and take your time about it. That'll take half a day. He says it right in front of Omar Bradley.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, where were we?
We were talking about a simple old soldier.
Bradley taking his shots where he can. Yeah.
Yep. We cut to the troops on the road, and Patton is on his Jeep and watches troops go by. And this whole sequence is great. Mm-hmm. And the contrast between Patton on his Jeep just being the king of all this stuff, and he looks out at this huge convoy of vehicles and says, look at that, gentlemen.
Compared to war, all other forms of human endeavor shrink to insignificance.
Which I think is true. And we contrast that to Bradley under artillery fire. His Jeep gets hit. He jumps out of it. He runs for cover. He loses his helmet. There's explosions all around. He runs for another piece of cover. Another soldier, just an ordinary soldier, shows up next to him and says,
"What silly son of a bitch is in charge of this operation?"
I don't know, but they ought to hang him.
Is he talking about Patton or himself?
I think he's talking about Patton.
I think it could go either way.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting moment. By the way, Omar Bradley had terrible, terrible hemorrhoids.
Mm. Oh, wow.
And in fact, like really bad hemorrhoids. And in fact, he had surgery the day before the Sicily operation started.
Oh, wow.
On his hemorrhoids. And he would refuse to stay. He was supposed to stay in recovery for a couple of days, and he refused. And he was in agony through this whole process.
Yeah, that's insane. I had a hemorrhoidectomy. It's the worst experience of your life. Every time you go to the bathroom, it feels like broken glass is coming out of your butthole. So you're supposed to sit. It's no lie. You're supposed to sit in warm water 3 or 4 times a day for like half an hour to 45 minutes for 2 weeks. That's the recovery process. So the fact that he was willing to do a battle with this incredible pain going on, if he had that inside his butt, is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
I mean, it's funny. Reading this book, Omar Bradley and Ike are the heroes. Like, you know, like Patton is such a fucking pain in the ass. I mean, he does great things sometimes. It's like, Jesus Christ. And Omar and Ike are just battling through. Just keep going.
That's from Bradley's point of view. So
yeah. And Patton is having a meeting with some ministers.
Colonel Davis told us around your quarters, General Patton, and I was interested to see a Bible by your bed. Do you actually find time to read it?
I sure do. Every goddamn day.
In Germany, we hear that the Allies have taken Palermo. Monty hears that the Allies have taken Palermo and says, damn! And now we're in Palermo at a parade. And one of the things that's interesting, this is written by Francis Ford Coppola. His connections to Sicily.
Great point. This
is his ancestors.
Yeah.
This is a ridiculous parade. It didn't happen this way at all. Like, where did they get all the little American flags and like Sicily in the middle of World War II?
Yeah,
it's
that struck me this time too. I was like, they wouldn't be celebrating the Americans coming in to save them. What are you talking about?
Well, and like the huge red carpet up to the Cardinal on the stairs. It's like, man, they put together quite a do.
Yeah,
considering we're in the middle of a war. But they did have a small parade, and this is where Omar Bradley really started to turn on Patton.
Yeah,
and now Patton's talking to the press. It's never a good idea.
What's your feeling about Montgomery?
And this is where Patton's going to get into trouble.
He's the best general the English have. But he seems a little more concerned with not losing a battle than he does about winning one.
And they go, oh, you're saying he's not aggressive enough? And he says, look, hold on. I've been having trouble lately. My mouth's been getting me in a lot of trouble lately.
If I've said anything a little too critical of my distinguished British colleague, let's just forget all about it, huh?
And he knew what was going to happen. Yeah.
You think he knew?
Oh, of course he knew. I think he knew what he was trying to do, and he thought it would work out in his favor every time, and it didn't. So
Patton had already gotten called by Ike many, many times at this point to shut up.
Yeah. So he knew.
Yeah.
You know, by even talking to the press, he was courting the possibility.
We'll tell you one thing, off the record. I'm going to beat that gentleman to Messina.
Not off the record. It's on the newspaper. And now Patton's kind of getting hung up. He's slogging, just like Montgomery was. And he has a meeting with Omar and another general, and they say, we're going to have a coordinated amphibious attack on the 11th. And that general says, I don't think we can make it.
Hell, it's only 15, 20 miles.
General, my boys have been fighting and dying for yards.
Patton's response, maybe you better kick a few butts if you have to. Patton's such a dick in this scene.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I can't do the impossible.
And now Omar steps in, and this is very interesting. He says,
George, if Lucian's right and we can't back him up by land, our end run could be a disaster. Now, those men might get caught up there on the beach and cut to pieces.
And Patton, who's lying down, looks like he's got a headache or something.
The landing is on. We're going to Messina. We're going to get there before Montgomery does.
That's it right there.
Yep. If you're grandstanding the way he is, and you're calling out an old soldier and you're saying, oh, you're too old to know the blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. It's the reason the game is happening is because you're forcing the game to happen. And it does not have to happen at this speed. It does not have to happen. This is all for your individual glory. And the way he speaks to that general is just like the way that Patton would never allow anyone to speak to him in that way, you know, when he wasn't groveling for, asking for command back. But it's such a terrible scene because it shows you the hubris of Patton in those moments. You know, the film does an incredible job of showing you it's a really well-rounded portrayal of this man. You see his, tender-hearted moments. You see his vulnerability. You see his fear, his depression, his self-hatred. But you also see his maniacal drive to be considered the best, or to be to win, or to be, to force people to say he's a better general than anybody else. And it is it's a dangerous path to walk, because in the end it'll leave you with empty accolades. And he says it later, right at the end of the movie. He says, like, the person walking behind the Roman emperor whispering in his ear, all glory is fleeting, which is the lesson. All glory is fleeting. Chasing glory without fixing yourself first is a useless endeavor because it will be gone.
I think chasing glory, period, is a fairly useless endeavor. And of course, there are a lot of people who wouldn't agree with that, who are really into how they appear to the world and to history. And like, to me, it's like the gig is win the war.
Right.
That's it. Because I like Omar Bradley or Eisenhower, I'm a team player.
Right.
Like, I'm like, well, we want to win. If we can win and I don't get glory, that's better than me getting glory and us losing.
Yeah.
The way he frames everything, his whole driving force is him.
Yes.
I mean, he's a narcissist. He like sees the world as he wants it. And he is willing, because this is the thing. How we can't know exactly how close a thing this battle was. Mm-hmm. We know that this one general, who seems like an experienced guy, and Omar Bradley are concerned that if these things don't meet up exactly right time, exactly right place, there's going to be a massacre.
Yeah.
Which means that George is pretty close to it possibly going wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you turn this the other way, let's say a truck runs out of gas, or something happens in battle that changes the timing and those soldiers get trapped on the beach and wiped out. Well, then he just cost thousands of lives for his own ego.
Yep.
And so it happened to work. But this is the thing. This is why, like, that as a motivating force is so freaking dangerous.
You're a very good man, Lucian. But you want to guard against being too conservative. Go on, have a drink.
Excuse me, sir, I won't be drinking for the next couple of days.
And he exits. Great exit.
You believe Truscott's right, huh?
And I think this is such an interesting moment.
No. But I do know that you're gambling with the lives of those boys just so you can beat Montgomery into Messina.
Because what's so interesting to me about this moment, first of all, that he's totally nailed George.
Yeah.
But he says, do you think he's right? And he says, no. Omar agrees with Patton.
Right.
He thinks this is the right military strategy. He's just critical of his motivation.
Yes, exactly. And rightfully so.
There's one big difference between you and me, George. I do this job because I've been trained to do it. You do it because you love it.
It's an interesting role for him to have, because he just gets to come in and be completely solid, say a great line. He doesn't have to do that much.
I mean, this is where Malden was at this stage of his career as well. I mean, he's about to be on TV as well in the streets of San Francisco, like about a year or two later.
Oh, that's true.
Or a few years later. Yeah. So it's like this is where he was, and in essence, he's covering George C. Scott's flank. As George C. Scott barrels through this movie,
totally.
It's Carl Malden covering his flank.
It's the battle we hear that General Truscott, who's the guy who is in trouble. And so George goes, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. And he goes down to the beach, and Truscott doesn't have his helmet on. He's looking at a map, and George is across the water. And he goes, how the hell did you get there?
You get that outfit cranked up, you're going to be out of a job. And put that helmet on. Yes, sir.
And I love there's like a bomb explodes in the water right in front of him. And this whole sequence, it's so fun. Yeah. This is the opposite part of the movie, is we talked about how troubling this guy is. But seeing him in battle is a blast.
Yeah.
He's having, it's just, we see him in a Jeep, and the shot is from behind, and there's a whole column of trucks that are stopped, and he drives through it all. It's a really cool shot, and they're under fire from a strafing run, and he pulls up to a bridge, and these two mules who won't move on the bridge, and all the army is in chaos, and Patton loses it.
The whole column gets stalled and strafed on account of a couple of jackasses? What the hell's the matter with you?
And he pulls out his gun, and he kills both mules.
Yeah.
Which is completely the right choice.
Right.
That is 100% the right thing to do. There are people getting killed. You know, this is where you look at the balance and you go, yeah, I'm sorry about these animals. Yeah. And I'm sorry about this guy's property, but no, throw them over the bridge. They do. We see a bunch of guys pinned down, and one of the officers is complaining about air support. And George says,
the hell with that. Nobody's getting any air support. If you can't put some fire into this battalion, Colonel, I'll get somebody who can. Major? You the executive officer here?
Yes, sir.
Well, you're now the commanding officer. You got 4 hours to break through that beachhead down there. If you don't make it by then, I'll fire you.
And he walks away, and the colonel's just standing there totally stunned. The major walks up to him and says,
Colonel, there are 50,000 men on this island who'd like to shoot that son of a bitch.
And then we see this moment, and this is the 70s. This is a 70s moment as we see these wounded men. It's suddenly very quiet. Our pace has been really fast. Now the pace is really slow. Yeah. And George is sitting in his Jeep as wounded men go by. It's a low angle. There's a body in the foreground, and he sits calmly and quietly. And the most disturbing moment is one of the men going by goes,
please take me home. Take me home. Please take me home.
Over and over again.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
And George just sits.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in such contrast to him shooting the mules or him yelling at the, it was active, loud, and now this is the cost.
There he goes, old blood and guts.
Yeah, our blood. His guts.
We've reached the hospital. The first half of this scene, George Patton is exactly what he should be.
That's a great setup, man.
Yeah, he talks to the wounded men, connects with them. There's a man that's unconscious, and he kneels down, clearly moved, which he was. He was a very emotional guy. Yep. He wept a lot in front of other people.
Wow.
And pins a medal on him and then prays silently. And you see the other patients and the doctors and the nurses all watching this guy with real reverence.
Yeah.
And it's such an important setup because of what's about to happen.
Yeah.
What's the matter with you?
I guess I just can't take it, sir.
And I think his performance is great, by the way, the soldier.
Oh, the soldier, yeah.
It's my nerves, sir. I just can't stand the shelling anymore.
Your nerves? Well, hell, you're just a goddamn coward.
And he stands up, and we're in like a low angle, and he looks huge, and he slaps the guy's helmet.
Shut up! You don't have a yellow bastard sitting here crying in front of these brave men who've been wounded in battle.
Now the guy's just sobbing, and he yells, shut up, and he knocks the helmet off his head.
Shut up!
And now everyone's stunned. The patients are sitting up. Everyone is shocked by what's happening. He says,
you won't have sons of bitches who are afraid to fight, stinking up this place of honor. You're going back to the front, my friend. You may get shot, you may get killed, but you're going up to the fighting. Either that or I'm going to stand you up in front of a firing squad. I ought to shoot you myself, you goddamn bastard. Get him out of here.
Goes to reach for his gun.
It's incredible.
Send him up to the front. You hear me? You goddamn coward!
And then he kind of gets himself under control and realizes he's lost it in front of these people.
I won't have cowards in my army.
As if it's somehow an excuse for what he did.
Patton didn't slap just one guy. He slapped two guys. And he didn't just reach for his weapon. He drew his weapon and aimed at the guy's face.
Jesus.
Yeah. This is what he wrote in his diary that night. He wrote, I probably saved that man's soul.
Self-aggrandizement. Yeah. This is akin to what happened to Woody Hayes in college football, Ohio State college football. Woody had become so enamored with himself and become such a stalwart at Ohio State that there was towards the tail end of his, and really he was fired after this, but towards the tail end of his career, he, after a particular incident between the other team and his team, they slammed into, there was like a little bit of fighting going on. I think Woody comes and he punches the player in the face twice, which is, of course, once again, Hoosiers reference, which, because Hackman's character punches. Yeah. So when he does that, it's the old school thing of him thinking he can dole out that kind of justice to what he deems to be a cowardly act by the other team. And that ends up getting him fired. And he's like, I don't know, just kind of ridiculed for it and taken a task for it. And it's that thing. You can be tough as you want to people who are willing to receive it. The second you slap someone who's overwhelmed by the moment or overwhelmed by the situation, it speaks so ill of you as a human being, because all of us have moments where we experience that we're overwhelmed by a situation, And how would we like it if someone came along and slapped us in the helmet or slapped us or pulled a gun on us, for God's sakes, What if a general came up and watched Patton crying in front of a soldier and was like, "What's wrong with you?" Crying in front of, don't you show that weakness in front of that, and slapped Patton in the face. How would he feel about that? So
there's so much about this moment. I mean, obviously, this is the turning point. This is the fulcrum on which this film turns.
Yeah.
But our view on this has evolved. So this has come up on our show before, but that there was a time when there was this thing called being shell shocked.
Yes.
Right. And then there's this thing called battle fatigue, which is what we call it then. And there's another name, which I can't remember what it is. And now we get to today where it's PTSD.
Right.
And we've evolved so much in our way of thinking about this, that this is not, it's not that there are brave people and there are cowardly people. It's that there's a cumulative effect of being in a war and going through traumatic events. And even, American Sniper or whatever, like there could be people who were extremely brave and are still have these moments of just being overwhelmed emotionally. Yeah. So, I mean, I think watching this now, I think our experiences has changed a little bit and seen it. But the other thing about this is, what is that whole first speech about? Americans traditionally love to fight and cannot tolerate a loser. His whole framing of masculinity, of being a soldier, of what being an American is all about physical courage. And then he even says, I know some of you are worried that maybe you'll get scared, but when you reach your hand in the pile of goo, you'll know what to do. And this is the refutation of that moment, because I don't think he knows anything about what the emotions this guy's experiencing are. Right. He thinks, if you're afraid, you just overcome it. And then you are brave and you will be fine. And then you will feel like a man, and that is good. Right. And that he doesn't understand what is happening to this guy. I mean, he literally says, I think I saved that guy's soul. It's just awful.
Yeah.
I had to kick a few butts up there, but Truscott finally broke through those people on the beach.
Have you seen the casualty list?
Yes, I've seen them.
And he tells him, get dressed because we're going to have a big parade going into the city.
You go ahead, George. I'm not very good at that.
General Bradley, it's time to consider just how many casualties we'd have if we were still down there crawling along that goddamn road.
And we can't know the answer.
Right.
We don't know what Omar's strategy would have been. We don't know what the casualties would have been. And there are certainly times to be aggressive, to go for it, 100%. And the big question, I think, is, does your motivation matter? Particularly when it comes to war. And I think that's what this is. That it's funny, I don't know how to put this. We're going through a time where we're really reconsidering what behaviors are appropriate in certain situations. Yeah. And I think in this moment in time, the decision was made over and over and over again that George S. Patton was worth it. Mm-hmm. That the war was so important and so serious that this particular person who violates so many rules and is such an egotist and a prima donna and a pain in the ass is still worth it.
It's a necessary evil.
And today, I think we would not make that decision. I mean, if you heard a general had slapped a soldier today, that guy's out. He's out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for some people, ego and spite and anger and jealousy and all those motivations, like for me, I've mentioned several times there's this friend of mine who's no longer my friend, and that was a very, very painful time in my life. And this is the guy I did martial arts with forever. Mm-hmm. And our friendship ended before I got my black belt. And I think there is a possibility that if I hadn't had that experience of my friendship ending, I might not have gotten my black belt, and maybe not as quickly. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten the second degree black belt, and I wouldn't have started teaching, because I thought of him for years every time I stepped onto the mat. Mm-hmm. It wasn't spite. It wasn't anger but it was like I wasn't quitting. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so like, that's not a very worthy motivation to do a worthy thing.
Right.
Or, you go on a diet because of vanity, because you want people to like your appearance, or there's all sorts of things we do that are positive things that are good for us, but maybe have a not so positive motivation down at your core.
Right.
Yeah.
He saved your soul. Is that what you want to say?
We're in Messina. Yes, he saved my soul.
There you go.
We're in Messina. The English are marching in with their bagpipes, and the bagpipes turn the corner, and they kind of go, meow.
A little Animal House moment.
Totally. Well, and that's the song that they play, is the same song in the scene from Animal House. And there's Montgomery, and he sees the U.S. military there, and Patton's there smiling.
Don't smirk, Patton. I shan't kiss you.
Pity, because I shaved very close this morning in preparation for getting smacked by you.
And their little fake smiles is just great.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a real celebratory moment. And then we cut to a moment whose emotions are completely the opposite. Patton is alone, sitting in a very fancy room, which he's in a lot in this movie.
Yeah.
And Omar comes in, and Patton says, I got a letter from Ike. And as Omar sits to read, Patton starts talking about reading Caesar's commentaries, which, by the way, was what Coppola was reading when he wrote the script.
Right.
That's why Caesar's commentaries come up a lot.
Oh.
In battle, Caesar wore a red robe to distinguish him from his men. I was struck by that fact because...
And then he stops, and his total emotion changes. And you can see he's trying to put up a front, in talking about this Caesar thing. And then he says...
Despicable. That's the first time in my life anybody ever applied that word to me.
And Omar tries to lessen the blow. He says, well, at least it's a personal reprimand. It's not official. And Patton just goes, the man was yellow. He should have been tried and shot.
My God, have they forgotten about all the people who've taken a hell of a lot worse than a little kick in the pants? I ruffled his pride a little bit. What's that compared to war? 2 weeks ago, when we took Palermo, they called me a hero, said I was the greatest general since Stonewall Jackson.
And now they draw cartoons about you.
And there's a cartoon of him with an iron boot with a swastika on it, kicking a soldier.
Swastika on my boot.
And what's funny, if you watch Carl Malden, he's kind of just thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
This cartoon, because if someone made a silly cartoon about him, he would go, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not funny to Patton. And now we hear that he's going to have to not only apologize to the soldiers, but all the doctors, all the nurses, all the patients, and the entire 7th Army as a whole.
Yeah.
Wow. Last thing he says, God, I feel low. Here's what happened after the slaps. The complaint from the doctors in both hospitals where the 2 slaps took place go up the chain of command. And each officer hands it to the commanding officer, to the next commanding officer, until it gets to Omar Bradley. And Omar Bradley has the choice. He's supposed to submit it to his commanding officer.
Right.
And he has really turned against Patton at this point because he didn't like his behavior throughout the Battle of Sicily. And he spent a long time debating what to do. And he took the complaint and he locked it up in his safe. He hid it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did it get out?
But the report kind of goes around and it finally gets to Ike. And Ike is going, what do I do with this? And he decided to keep it under wraps.
Wow.
So he hid it as well, but he wrote apparently a truly scathing letter to Ike. To Patton. Right. Made Patton cry.
What are you crying about?
Exactly. And this is the moment at which Eisenhower decided at this moment that Patton would never rise above Army command. So he could command an army, but he couldn't command a combined force.
Yeah.
He was never going to do that. He was not capable of it. You know who I kept thinking about with Patton? Ego, emotional. It's a weird one. Steve Jobs. Brutal, abusive, brilliant, singular. Steve Jobs would burst into tears, in situations. He would insult people. He would bully people. And this big ego that just had to get what he wanted, We're in church. Patton is praying. It's a very strange prayer. we're hearing it in voiceover, and he gets up and he walks out in front of the troops, and we hear "at ease." And there's some weird parallel between this speech and the speech at the opening.
Yes, agreed.
It is not, as apologies go,
no,
a particularly good one.
It's one of those ones where they go, "I'm sorry if anything I said offended you." It's not saying I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. And this is one of the keys to apologies. If you spend most of your time explaining what your motivation was and why the thing you did was right, and only had a tiny amount of time apologizing, it's not that good.
You don't really believe in it. Yeah.
My sole purpose was to try to restore in him some appreciation of his obligations as a man and as a soldier. If one can shame a coward, I felt one might help him to regain his self-respect. This was on my mind.
So what he's done is he's continuing to insult him.
Oh, yeah.
You are a coward. You are not a man. You are failing as a soldier.
Right.
And then he says his method was wrong. So his motivation was fine. His method was wrong.
Now I freely admit that my method was wrong, but I hope you can understand my motive and will accept this explanation and this apology.
Yeah. Begrudgingly.
And then dismissed. Yeah, it's so begrudging.
No further question.
Yeah, that's it. And he gets back to his quarters, and his, kiss-assy aide says, I took in a poll and most of the people are for you. And then we hear he's been relieved of 7th Army. And again, his aide says, oh, well, that's probably because he's going to make you the commander of the combined force. Let's go have some drinks. We go have some drinks, and now it's later, and it's his bedroom, and there's his, his body man, I guess, George, who I actually like this relationship. I think. Yeah. African-American guy. And this guy's being real nice. Like, can I get you some milk? You want a sleeping pill? Can I tuck you in? Are you going to be okay?
What's going on here anyway?
Well, I heard the news tonight, sir. They announced it on the radio.
What news?
About General Bradley, sir. How they gave him the top American command for the invasion.
And again, George C. Scott's performance of just going, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I just thought you might be feeling kind of low, sir.
And we walk into this completely ridiculously ornate bedroom.
One measly little slab. That's we're done.
Oh, George. I wish I'd kissed the son of a bitch.
Once again, walking back what he did.
Right? Yep. And the contrast between where we were in the battle and just the oh my God, this is awesome feeling to where we are right now, sitting with this guy. It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's a weird place to have an intermission.
Yeah.
Because it's a real downer.
Yep. I'm watching this documentary on Epix right now on George Foreman. And I stopped about 45 minutes, 50 minutes in. It's funny, it makes me think of this moment because of what you just said, Steve. George Foreman said, when I went to Zaire, all those people in the airport, the baggage handlers, they wouldn't even look at me because I was the heavyweight champion. They were ashamed to look at me because I was so proud. After I lost my belt to Ali, when I came back, all those same baggage handlers were patting me on the shoulder. No problem. Hey, you'll get him next time. But as if they were familiar with me. And that's the difference between a champion and falling off your championship. And he's like, and I hated that feeling.
That's interesting.
Feeling. And it was just fascinating because he's like, I liked it when they revered me. I hated when they felt they were on my level to even touch me. And it's just fascinating, right? It's fascinating. Of course, George went through an incredible convergence of himself emotionally and all that. But at that time, that's how he felt, right? And it's the same moment here with Patton. It's like, I was the king of the world. And I slapped one guy or two guys in real life. And I'm now, relieved of command and I don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things about Patton is in revealing his desire to beat Monty and revealing his putting the 3 stars on before he officially was supposed to happen, in revealing that it was about ego and that he was his favorite general and that he lost face because he didn't actually face Rommel. Rommel wasn't really there. In revealing all these things, he's actually revealed his vulnerabilities to everyone. Yeah. He's, because the flip side of the big ego and aren't I awesome is I'm really, really insecure. Yeah. And so when he comes in and everyone is buttering him up including George, saying you want some milk and, I thought you'd be feeling, is that he's really exposed in this moment. And particularly because he just had to do this apology in front of all the troops. And because the other thing about it is that he has created this image of himself as this iconic, brutal, tough guy, and now he has exposed that to be false to everyone. And so it's a really low point. And because you think about the end of the first act of Lawrence of Arabia, or you think of, it's like there's positivity a little bit going in, even though second half of Lawrence of Arabia gets really, really heavy.
Yeah.
But this one is like, man, this is a downer. And again, this is sort of that mix of World War II old school movie and Vietnam era movie.
Yeah.
One thing by this, so Ike and Marshall have been talking a lot about who was going to lead the Allied command. And the big description was they need someone has great combat skills, great logistical skills, is a great diplomat, and a great team player. They were never considering Patton for the job. Never.
Exactly. Yeah.
They picked Omar Bradley real early.
Right.
And Patton wrote in his diary that Brad was a kiss ass. And he just ripped up Eisenhower. He ripped up Marshall. He was pissed.
Yeah. It's not my fault. It's everyone else.
Everyone else's fault. And that is where we have reached the end, I think, of part one of our exploration of a big movie, Patton. John, do you have anything you want to add before we break for this time?
Not much, except just to say I hope you all are enjoying this particular breakdown of this first half of the movie. The second half of the movie, as Steve said, is going to be another emotional roller coaster ride as well. So I hope you're enjoying our analysis. And in between part one and part two, make sure to let us know what you think of our points of views on this, especially if Rachel Cushing is listening to this, who loves this movie like crazy. Let us know in between part one and part two, if you're listening in between part one and part two, what you think about how we're breaking down and analyzing this movie as well, and if we've missed anything in our approach or appreciation of all the characters involved in this movie.
And let us know what you think on our Facebook page. Do a search for the Cine-Files. Subscribe to the show at iTunes or Stitcher or YouTube or Spotify. Leave your reviews on iTunes, please. If you haven't done a review yet, I think it's time. You might even go up in the ranks, or we might go up in the ranks with your review. Leave your comments on YouTube. You can support the show with our all new tiers, all sorts of great stuff on patreon.com/thecine-files. You can buy Patton or any other movie we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net. You can reach me on Twitter at SRMorris, on Instagram at SRMorris1. You can reach the Cine-Files on Twitter at Cine_Files with an F, on Instagram with the Cine-Files podcast. And John, how would they reach you?
You can always reach me at The Roca Says on Twitter and on Instagram. And of course, come on over to my YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/John Roca Says. A lot of great content rolling through there. The Outlaw Nation, Mornings with the Outlaw, Game Time, reviews, trailer reactions, all of that. And I've got 2 new shows coming up. And if one might debut before this episode drops, we shall see. But certainly one that will open the doors for a lot of interesting conversations as well. So just go on over there and see all the content we got going on and subscribe to the channel.
And I think that's it for this week. We will see you next week with part 2 of Patton.